You never forget the first time a mountain tries to eat you. I wasn't exactly supposed to be there, mind you, as few of my more formative adventures begin with me asking permission from the powers that be. But when you're wandering the deep roads with nothing but a half-eaten tin of pickled blue cat mushrooms and a reputation for asking far too many questions about food, you tend to end up places you shouldn't. Places like a scavenger cruise mess circle, just outside of a freshly collapsed tunnel in the Underdark, where everyone's whispering one word with the same fearful reverence normally reserved for gods and in-laws: worm. To be perfectly honest, I didn't know exactly what they meant at first. I thought perhaps a minor tunneling creature, something manageable. Maybe the sort of beast that could be lured off with a bit of bait and a song, but no, this was a purple worm. Gargantuan. Legendary. The kind of thing that turns hardened adventurers into a memory and soft-hearted halflings like me into stories told to warn children against wandering too far from the fire. The exact thing I had spent my whole life doing. It's funny how often food brings me to the edge of disaster. Or perhaps it's that disaster tastes better with seasoning. Either way, I didn't run. I stayed, I listened, and eventually I ate. But I definitely didn't do it on my own. They called themselves the Hollow Pickers. Dwergar mostly, though it had turned into a found family for any outcast who could hold a pickaxe and needed a meal. They were the tough, quiet sorts, with voices like grinding stone, and boots that never quite stopped tracking in bits of the Underdark. There were a few deep gnomes among them, smaller still, with wiry limbs and eyes like glittering marbles in the dark. One surface dwarf was tagging along, insisting he was there because he'd lost a bet. I didn't impress him on the details. Everyone down there had their reasons, and I had mine. Curiosity, hunger, and the deeply misplaced confidence of a halfling who once survived eating a gelatinous cube's untreated outer layer, just to see. I mean, you can't blame me. Gelatinous cube puckers are so good. It had to be better straight from the source, right? Thank God for clerics. Anyways, I found them in a trader's alcove, and as commonly happens to me, a bit of booze greased the gears of friendship, and suddenly their leader Kopat invited me along on a recovery job. Once again, just for the word worm. The kind where you wait for someone else to slay the horror, then swoop in to claim the meat, and whatever the beast swallowed that didn't dissolve. I was warned, of course. Stay behind the ones with the real armor, don't touch anything that hisses, and most importantly, never cut too deep without knowing what's beneath. Purple worms, you see, are not just big, they're post-mortem minefields. Cut close to a stomach sack, and you risk a face full of acid strong enough to melt stone. Step wrong inside the body, and the pressurized muscles might collapse in on you like a stone door slamming shot. Even after death, their nerves switch and contract, and things can go smoothly in butchery until a very sudden and very unforeseen change of fate completely swallows you up. The difference between a young purple worm harvester and a veteran comes down to one thing: vigilance. Or maybe I should say that's the one thing that lets a young purple worm harvester grow old. Anyways, as we move closer to the anticipated site of the kill, the Hollow Pickers whispered more and more. Lanterns were dimmed, footsteps softened, every piece of gear muffled with cloth. We didn't want the hunting party to see us, not until they were long gone. We also didn't want to draw the attention of the other scavengers, or worse, beasts. The smell of purple worm blood draws horrors from beneath the stone. Things with too many eyes and not enough skin. Things that eat carrion and don't care how fresh it is, and if they find you before they find the carrion, they aren't too picky. So, when the vibrations began, when the battle roared through the tunnels like distant thunder, we crouched in the dark and waited. Ears to stone, hearts in our mouths. The battle itself I didn't witness directly. We waited in a safe alcove, far enough back from the kill zone that the vibrations came reverberated through the stone walls. We heard the cries of battle, the screams of pain of the adventuring party, and eventually the thud of the purple worm hitting the ground for the last time. And when it did, the ground shook. Dust fell in little ghostly ribbons from the tunnel ceiling, and all around me the Hollow Pickers prepared. They checked tools, reinforced straps, and murmured short blessings in a language I didn't understand. I pretended to check my cooking knives to stay busy. It seemed polite even though I knew it didn't change much. When the signal finally came from the scout, 3 sharp knocks on the stone, we advanced. The corridor widened, then opened into a shattered, steaming cavity of rock and ruin. The purple worm lay there like a collapsed cathedral, its body a landscape of chitin, mucus, and torn flesh, and I felt a certain reverence seeing it up close. But that moment of reverie was brief. The crew wasted no time. They found out with a practiced position. Setting to work on the outer chitin first, the mucus layer clung to everything, oozing in slow rivulets that dripped down onto the stone. It smelled faintly of mildew, like boiled eggs left in a cave too long. One gnome slipped while trying to pry loose a segment of plate. Another shouted something about a pressure pocket right before it vented a gush of warm, noxious steam. I kept my distance, notebook open, recording everything. Every tool, every step, every shouted curse. The crew didn't mind. They had a job to do, and I wasn't in the way mostly. But before I go further, let me say this. We were scavengers. That means we were trespassers, in a way. Harvesters not of glory, but of the leftovers of someone else's hard work. The bits deemed unworthy of the tale. And scavengers that get caught by the ones who did do the hard work, well, no one would judge a hunting party for what they need to do in order to secure their hard work. But it goes both ways. A hunting party knows that scavengers are part of the gig. You see, when a purple worm falls in the Underdark, it doesn't just make a sound, it sends an invitation. The vibrations spread through stone quickly and without restraint. Yes, the hollow pickers had a head start, sure. One of their contracts in a surface town had tipped them off about a hunting party preparing for a purple worm hunt. That gave us a bit of an edge, but that lead had evaporated as soon as the worm hit the ground for the last time. By the time we were midway through the first cuts, other shadows were stirring in the periphery. Rival scavenger crews, scrappers from deeper than I dared travel before, and various Underdark beasts were also hungry for an easy meal. The hollow pickers stiffened and spread out not just to harvest, but to hold their ground. The real chaos came at the gullet. You see, the purple worm's crop, a thick-walled, muscular, grinding chamber situated just behind the throat. It's not only a key organ in the creature's digestive process, but also an inadvertent treasure vault. As the worm burrows through the earth and swallows vast quantities of stone, soil, and prey, the hard or indigestible materials often become trapped in the crop before being fully broken down or passed into the more corrosive stomach chambers. Trawling through a worm's crop may yield everything from raw ore and uncut gemstones to metal weapons, armor fragments, coins, and the occasional enchanted item hardy enough to withstand the journey. Many bards sing stories of adventurers who pull intact rings of protections, platinum belt buckles, and even enchanted swords from within the grit of a worm's crop. And they're often still bearing the bloodstains of their last owners. When a worm happens to pass through a buried ruin, a forgotten battlefield, or, gods forbid, an entire village, its crop becomes a morbid catalog of whatever and whoever it ingested in its path. One man's lost livelihood can quickly become a scavenger's lucky day. Our cutters had barely started hauling out the slurry from the crop when the party who actually felled the beast had finished their post-battle reprieve, and took notice of our activities, a worst-case scenario for us as we were trying to avoid their gaze and their notice. A big surface elf with blood still on her cloak and a magical spear whose tip glowed in the dark cavern, she saw us. She looked around and saw the crowd swarming the worm, and yet out a wordless yell. Then words were exchanged. Sharp ones. But right as the fight broke out, we saw the shadows again. The shadows of the ones who were also looking for a chance at the treasure of the crop. The throat of the worm was rushed by rival scavengers, and the skirmish mostly ended as everyone realized that time spent fighting was time that could be used trawling for treasure. It was a mad dash of clattering blades, flesh hooks, and gravel. A small kobold found a glimmering bauble made of gold and onyx, most likely some sort of enchanted item, though I didn't get a good look. But, as kobolds often do, his excitement got the better of him, and as he yelped in glee at his find, all eyes turned on him. He was ran through with a blade, and a free-for-all between adventurers and scavengers took place. Our own crop trawlers had enough experience to know not to get involved in a scuffle like that, and they used that time to focus on the beast instead. One of the hollow pickers trawled up an intact sword, with a gold inlay and a carved pommel indicating some regal prestige. Another was able to find various coins of gold and platinum, and here their experience and wisdom was once again on display. They got their hands full, and despite the promise of more fortune, they got out with what they had. While chaos raged near the crop, another squad of the hollow pickers had turned their attention to a different prize, one of the worm's hearts. With so many eyes focused on treasure in the crop, they navigated the worm's body, cutting in to find clues as to where exactly the next heart was. I'm still unsure what exactly they were looking for, but each time they made a cut, an old Dwergar looked through the bloody flesh, seemed deep in concentration, then simply said, "Closer," in a low, gravelly voice, and continued walking the length of the worm. Finally, he found what he was looking for and told the squad to start cutting. The heart was buried deep within the hardened cartilage dome that contained it, wrapped in layers of twitching flesh and suspended between redundant organs like great engines in a derelict war machine. One of the butchers, a deep gnome with arms like braided rope, used a crystal-edged chisel to open the cavity, while another kept a steadfast watch for any signs of sudden flesh collapse. But just as they began to free the heart, trouble found us. Carrion crawlers, 2 of them, had tunneled into the carcass from one of its flank wounds, drawn by the scent of blood and guts. Long, slick, multi-legged bugs with paralytic mouths and a hunger for soft parts. The hollow pickers fought them off while the deep gnome continued removing the heart surgically. Thankfully, we didn't suffer any losses, though one of the Dwergar did get a nasty gash on his arm before the crawlers decided we were more trouble than we're worth and burrowed back into the worm to escape. When all had settled, we had the worm heart wrapped and ready with the blood drained into vials. With a full haul, we pulled out. We got what we came for, a cart full of meat, a full worm heart, and some shiny treasures. We left as quietly as we'd come, though the echoes of the brawl rang in my ears for hours. I never did find out who won the final fight at the crop pit, but I knew I wasn't one of the losers, and that was enough for me. We returned to the hollow picker settlement. Not a village exactly, more of a series of chambers carved into the pits of the Underdark, interconnected by low halls and lit by dim fungal growths. It was quiet, smoky, and filled with the sense of damp stone and simmering stew. I tried to assist with the butchering of the large portions of meat, but my assistance was not necessary, as the butchering team worked like a well-oiled machine, cutting, separating, and cleaning each individual section of the worm they had brought home. After I took notes on every little aspect of their butchering process, I retreated to the sleeping quarters they were allowing me to use during my stay. I'm not sure how many hours later it was. Time's always hard to keep track of in the Underdark. But I was awoken and asked to help cook by Kopat, the one who originally invited me on this. He brought me into the kitchens where I saw a flurry of stone hearths, knives of stone and bone, and a few precious pans that they had traded from surface merchants. The cooks were all elders, gruff and focused. They didn't speak to me much at first, but when I offered to help chop up some of the root bulbs, they had made space. The first dish we prepared was grilled worm skewers. The midsection meat was lean and rich, needing only the right touch to bring it to life. One elder, with massive arms and a silent demeanor, mixed a marinade of fermented fungal staps, vinegar, and ground rust root. We skewered the meat on thin spits made from the chitin of the worm, then let the skewer soak in the marinade and laid them on grates above slow-burning peat and biomass, then basted them with more of that sweet and sticky marinade. I watched carefully, noting the timing, the color changes, and the way the glaze bubbled just before it was done. Next came the stone blood carpaccio. An old deep gnome named Bottle took me aside after I was done with the skewers. He led me to a cold chamber where the heart meat had been resting overnight. With a sharp knife made from bone, he sliced wafer-thin pieces of the heart, then laid them on chilled stone slabs. We dressed them with algae oil, sprinkled crushed salt crystals, and added a delicate dusting of glow moss. He made me repeat the process again and again until I got the slices just right, a welcome reprieve for him as his arthritis was flaring up. Then the final dish was wormtail stew, although this dish was actually what we started working on first in the day. It simmered away through the day as we did the rest of the cooking and cleaning. A whole team worked the pot, adding chunks of tail meat, peeled fungus, broth made from the worm chitin, and a wide range of Underdark seasoning. The stew aroma changed by the hour. At one point, someone tossed in pickled beetle shell. Another added what they claimed was cave truffle. And I added a few pinches of my own dried mushroom jerky, just enough to round out the flavor. It became a communal melting pot, and as the hollow pickers drank and jested, the stew came together. When we finally tasted it hours later, it was bold, rich, slightly spicy, and comforting in a way I hadn't expected. By the time we'd finished the spread, the entirety of their little settlement had crawled out from the woodwork. Old and young alike partook in the feast, and as sullen and morose as many of the hollow pickers had looked through the entire harvest, now their faces wore smiles. Smiles are rare in the Underdark. If only for a moment, it looked like they were truly excited about life, and I felt like I had gotten a glimpse of some rare art piece that would soon be shuttered away again. But while it was on display, I could do nothing but appreciate its beauty until I left the camp and went my own way. I didn't slay the worm, I didn't butcher it, and I didn't even swing a blade or shout a warning. But I was there. I watched, I learned, and I asked the questions that many others hadn't really thought to ask. And I wrote it all down. Every cut, every hiss of escaping gas, and every bone-rattling spasm of the dead worm. And hopefully that's enough. I'm happy to observe, to record, to taste, and to share. Because when you sit down at a table and eat something like purple worm stew, you're not just chewing on meat, you're partaking in a story. One that stretches from a collapsed tunnel deep in the Underdark to the pages of a halfling's well-traveled notebook. Food, after all, is how we make sense of the world. It's how we survive it. And if I can help even one soul understand that, one diner, one cook, one young adventurer with more questions than answers, then that's enough for me. Until the next bite, stay hungry, friends.